Hello, dear friends. Some say that I give negative news for reporting the signs of the collapse of the system. But this could be the opposite if it is interpreted as a positive transformation to something better. It looks like hell is breaking loose, but this is all part of the divine plan. Opinion piece. System collapse. Supply chains fail. The transportation system is gridlocked. Labor market is a puzzle. International Chamber of Shipping warns. Governments blocking shippers. Ships are piling up in China and the US. Port of Los Angeles asks for funding. Shippers demand freedom of movement. Blockades could last until spring. Bank of America warns of fragility. Bank of America service blocked. Central banks don't control the problem. Fed gives green light to all cryptocurrencies. It has no intention of banning them as in China. September was a terrible month for stocks. A market crash is coming that nobody believes in. Energy crisis deepens in Asia and Europe. Banks around the world are suffering major outages. Inflation hits clothing with high cotton prices. All hell is breaking loose in energy markets. Russia cuts supplies to Hungary via Ukraine. Long queues in Paris for food distribution center. Robert Kiyosaki forecasts a major collapse of markets in October. Economies around the world may feel China's energy shortages. Let's start. Even official media warn of a system collapse due to the failure of global supply chains. In an open letter Wednesday to heads of state attending the United Nations General Assembly, the International Chamber of Shipping and other industry groups warned of a collapse of the global transportation system if governments do not restore freedom of movement to transport workers. The workers who have sustained global supply chains for more than a year and a half during the crisis are exhausted. They are physically and mentally exhausted and have sent a message to authorities in all countries to start taking action to make their plight for more bearable. Seafarers, truckers and airline workers have managed with effort, hard work and many personal sacrifices in some cases to keep supply chains running so that empty shelves in supermarkets or full shortages have not been the dominant trend during the worst months of this crisis. But they are exhausted, fed up and need to be heard and have their demands met. Shortage of workers. At the moment, there is a weakening of the system that responds to 2 years of tension on transport workers. This tension, which is taking its toll, translates into a shortage of workers, which they expect to increase if nothing is done about it. They speak in their letter of the poor treatment that millions of workers have suffered during the crisis, which puts the supply chain under greater threat. For decades, we have all been able to take our extremely complex supply chains for granted. Things have always been where they needed to be, when they need to be there, and many of us simply assumed they always would be. But now, organizations representing 65 million transportation workers worldwide are openly warning that global supply chains are beginning to fail. Global supply chains are beginning to fail as 2 years of stress on transport workers take their toll, the groups wrote in quotes. The letter has also been signed by the International Air Transport Association, the International Road Transport Union, and the International Transport Workers Federation. Together, they represent 65 million transport workers worldwide. In quotes, all transport sectors are also experiencing a shortage of workers and expect more to leave as a result of the poor treatment millions have suffered, putting the supply chain under greater threat. He added, supply bottlenecks could last until next spring. Cargo blockade. Cargo ships piling up offshore. There are more than 60 container ships full of import cargo stuck offshore in Los Angeles and Long Beach, but there are more than twice as many, 154, waiting to load export cargo in Shanghai and Ningbo in China. Port of Los Angeles demands more funding. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are still not operating on 24-hour-a-day shifts, despite the huge backlog, and the Port of Los Angeles is said to have requested more federal funding. So far, the government has invested about $11 billion on the East Gulf Coast, compared to only $1 billion on the West Coast. Truck capacity has also slowed the port, with 50% of registered truck drivers coming to the port at least once a week, and 30% of truck appointments not being used every day. How exactly will these supply chain bottlenecks be resolved? Yes, they can send the army to deliver fuel, as in the UK, and stop the worst of the short-term panic of the forecasts. But will the army also deliver food? Or better, grow food, harvest it, ship it through their own port network, and then deliver it? Have you ever seen military farmers? Energy crisis deepens in Asia and Europe. There is panic buying of gasoline in the UK. Natural gas prices in Europe and Asia are skyrocketing. Protests are erupting across Europe due to rising electricity bills. India and China lack coal for utilities. Power is being rationed to factories in several Chinese provinces, and winter is approaching. Bank failures. Bank of America warns of impending fragility shock after last week's faster market recovery. How fast did the market recover from last Monday's Evergrande crash? So fast that, as Bank of America derivatives analysts show, it was the fastest recovery in 93 years, as the market's Pavlovian buy and burst response outweighed any fundamental concerns, in quotes. History suggests that we may see fragility in stocks in the short to medium term, warns Bank of America. This bank warned its investors that the US has already entered a recession as a result of the effects of the crisis on the economy. Bank of America is already down, with no account access, no transfers, and no ATMs. Bank of America is having computer problems. Account holders cannot log in, cannot deposit or transfer money, and ATMs are reportedly closed as well. Banks around the world are suffering major outages, leaving millions of customers in the lurch at the worst possible time. 20 banks with repeated outages, 6 countries, 1 blocked, 5 continents, 24 million dissatisfied customers. In New Zealand, now in its 7th week of nationwide lockout, one of the country's largest lenders, Kiwi Bank, failed on Tuesday, leaving many of its customers in the lurch. Several lenders, such as Commonwealth Bank and Ants Bank also, failed due to cyber attacks. New Zealand is not the only country to have suffered major outages in its banking system in recent weeks. Other countries include the UK, Japan, South Africa, Venezuela and Mexico, although there are no doubt more. Stock market. Wall Street kicks off October with gains. The New York Stock Exchange advanced in a broad rally on Friday after resolving mixed news on the economy and legislative wrangling in Washington at the start of the fourth quarter. Wall Street starts October with broad rally buoyed by economic cheer. Stocks rose higher Friday, entering the final quarter of 2021 in a buying mood fueled by positive economic data. Stocks bounce, but inflation fears persist. Global stocks bounced in a volatile trading on Friday, with debate over the timing of future interest rate hikes on both sides of the Atlantic intensified by Eurozone inflation jumping to a 13-year high. September was a terrible month for stocks. Economies around the world may feel China's power shortages, as China is struggling to deal with electricity shortages in its power grids. The rest of the world may feel the economic consequences of this struggle, warns the Wall Street Journal, citing businessmen and economists' account of the initial effects. European Union inflation jumps to 13-year high in September, driven mainly by higher energy prices and record natural gas costs. Annual inflation in the Eurozone in September accelerated to 3.4% from 3% to the previous month, reaching a 13-year high. Stocks under pressure due to inflation. Global stocks remained under pressure on Friday, and debate intensified over the timing of future interest rate hikes on both sides of the Atlantic. ECB has an inflation problem. Christine Lagarde faces a problem that her predecessors at the European Central Bank would have welcomed: too much inflation. This will encourage those who want the Frenchwoman to end her emergency monetary stimulus. British pig farmers call for help. Britain's pig farmers warned Friday of a pig crisis unless the government urgently eases an acute shortage of abattoir workers and butchers that has left up to 150,000 pigs on farms and facing costly slaughter. This is a cause. UK truck driver shortage will inflate produce prices before Christmas. The UK is short of 100 qualified truck drivers after tens of thousands returned to the European Union during Brexit, and 40,000 HGV driver tests were suspended. The lack of drivers has affected supply, resulting in higher logistics costs that could drive up the price of food and anything else transported by truck ahead of the Christmas season. Banning coal caused the crisis. The energy crisis unfolding in the UK is a direct consequence of its plans for net zero emissions through a switch to so-called renewables and a ban on coal power. Over the last 50 years, the UK has weaned itself off coal generation and become more reliant on gas as its main source of electricity generation, much of which is imported from Europe. In addition, strong investment in renewables over the last decade has also boosted wind production, contributing 24% of total generation by 2020. The eclipse of Europe. Today, Europe's role in world history is perceived to be passing, and the US turned to China and the Indo-Pacific is historic and permanent. The past belongs to Europe, and the future belongs to Asia. France. Long queues in Paris for the food distribution center, where situations remain critical since the crisis began. Russia. Russia's state-owned Gazprom has completely stopped transit of gas to Hungary via Ukraine on Friday, October 1st at 5 o'clock in the morning. Markets. Dollar poised for the best week since June on expected Fed tightening. The dollar began the final quarter of 2021 near its highest level of the year, hitting for its best week since June as investors expected the Fed to raise interest rates. Perfect storm lifts dollar on unsteady markets. A dollar rally is accelerating, driven by hawkish Fed tilt, rising treasury yields, and concerns about the possibility of a protracted battle to raise the debt ceiling. Treasury yields post biggest drop in months. Treasury yields fell Friday, a day after yields on 10 and 30 years bonds posted their biggest quarterly gains since March, and as central banks begin to move away from lax monetary policy environments. Oil prices stabilize. Oil closed Friday above $78 a barrel, just below a 3-year high reached earlier this week, on expectations that OPEC ministers will maintain a steady pace of supply increases. Inflation hits T-shirts and jeans with high cotton prices. Cotton futures in New York are rising, topping $1 and a pound for the first time in a decade, as adverse weather conditions and robust demand reduce global supply. Precious metals. Gold prices end higher. Gold futures ended higher on Friday, posting a small gain for the week, with prices finding some support from a weaker dollar and government bond yields after a reading of the cost of goods and services revealed a sharp increase for August. Gold recovers. Gold markets fell a bit over the course of the trading week, but then recovered. When they did, we ended up forming a hammer of sorts, which, of course, is a bullish sign. With this, it is very likely that we will continue to see the markets move along with the dollar, as there is a significant negative correlation between these two markets. Silver rallies as the dollar falls. The price of silver rallied as the dollar fell from a 6-month high. Treasury yields were mixed, but the widening interest rate differential in favor of the dollar over the past 2 weeks has put pressure on the silver price. The price of gold was also higher, which helped lift the precious metals complex. Since silver is priced in dollars, a stronger currency makes silver more expensive in other currencies. Cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin rises to highest level in nearly 2 weeks. Bitcoin rose Friday to its highest level since mid-September, driven in part by seasonal factors as well as supportive comments from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. Bitcoin rises 10%, leading cryptocurrency market rally. Bitcoin rose above 47,500 on Friday, with the top 20 cryptocurrencies almost all in the green, as El Salvador said it mined its first Bitcoin using volcanic energy, while Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said he has no intention of banning cryptocurrencies. The Fed may have given the green light to cryptocurrencies. Spain. Spain's inflation level hits 13-year high, driven by rising electricity prices. Spain's inflation level soared to a 13-year high in September, driven by rising energy costs. Consumer prices rose 4% year-on-year, the highest reading since September 2008, when the rate was 4.5%, 4.5%. Spain imposes $148 million fine on a rail cartel involving Siemens and Nokia. Spain's competition watchdog has fined 8 companies, including Siemens, Nokia, and ACS, a combined $148 million for allegedly manipulating public contracts for rail signaling systems. The Cumbre Vieja volcano is once again playing with the nerves of the population of the Canary island of La Palma. About 450 meters away from the main cone, 2 new mouths have opened, very close to each other. Rivers of lava flow through them and seem to want to join the main lava flow on its way to the sea. The management of the volcanic risk prevention plan in the Canary Islands has ordered the confinement of several population centers in the municipalities of El Paso and Los Llanos de Aridane due to a worsening of the air quality caused by the volcanic eruption of Cumbre Vieja. Hawaii's Kilauea volcano also erupts. Hawaii's Kilauea volcano began erupting on Wednesday following a swarm of earthquakes. Kilauea is one of the most active volcanoes on Earth. Spanish America. Ecuador to pardon thousands of prisoners after 118 died in worst prison riot in history. Ecuador plans to pardon up to 2,000 inmates to ease overcrowding in its detention centers after 118 prisoners died and 79 others were injured in the country's West prison riot. Venezuela opens the way to the digital bolivar. As of October 1st, the digital bolivar comes into effect in Venezuela, a measure that implies the elimination of 6 zeros in the monetary scale, and which aims to promote the use of electronic means as payment methods in order to reduce the use of cash. Venezuela's bolivar is revamped with 6 fewer zeros. Venezuela is launching a new version of the Bolivar in the latest attempt to save a currency so battered by years of hyperinflation that residents have embraced the dollar. Mexico's central bank raises interest rate to 4.75% on inflation concerns. Mexico's central bank on Thursday raised its benchmark interest rate by 4% to 4.75% in a 4-1 split vote on concerns about inflation. US warns Mexico about massive sewage spill into Rio Grande. A major pipeline rupture on the US side of the US-Mexico border is selling millions of liters per day of raw sewage into the Rio Grande, warns the International Boundary and Water Commission. Afghanistan. Afghan evacuees leave military bases before resettlement. Something unexpected is happening at military bases hosting Afghan evacuees. Many hundreds of them are simply leaving before receiving resettlement services. Afghan girls trapped at home, waiting for Taliban plan to reopen schools. As the weeks pass in Afghanistan, the new Taliban administration has yet to announce when it will reopen high schools for girls, leaving them trapped at home while their siblings return to class. Turkish Red Crescent sends aid to feed displaced Afghans. The Turkish Red Crescent is sending aid to Afghanistan to feed internally displaced people in need amid the turmoil that followed the Taliban takeover, the organization's director said Friday. Greece says it will not allow uncontrolled migrant flows from Afghanistan. Greece will not allow a repeat of the 2015 migrant crisis at its borders following the deteriorating situation in Afghanistan. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis said after visiting a new migrant camp on a nearby island. Rescue flight carrying Americans and Afghans denied entry. A non-profit organization organized by a loose network of veterans and current service members to help evacuate vulnerable Americans and Afghans from Kabul is seeing a chartered flight with more than 100 Americans and green card holders denied entry to the U.S. by the Department of Homeland Security, according to Reuters. They are being held in Abu Dhabi after arriving from Kabul with 117 people, including 59 children. Jailed Marine Lieutenant Colonel who called for military leaders to be held accountable for Afghanistan withdrawal. The Marine removed from command after criticizing senior military leaders for their handling of the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan is in the brig. Opinions. X22 report. The government will now remain open until December. The debt limit was not raised and the deficit bill was implemented to fund the government. The tax proposal is the same as we have seen, and mega wealthy corporations will use the same loopholes. The infrastructure bill includes taxes and how many miles one drives. People are waking up and asking questions about the banking system. White House economic advisor admits higher inflation likely to stay longer. White House economic advisor Jared Bernstein told Fox News that inflation is likely to stay elevated for longer than expected. Bernstein believes the inflation rate will be around 4% by 2021 before falling to 2.3% in 2022. He didn't say when, but noted that inflation would remain high until the middle of next year. The inflation that central banks don't see. On Wednesday, we heard from the Big Four Jerome Powell, Christine Lagarde, Haruhiko Kuroda, and Andrew Bailey more or less the same message. Inflation is here, but it is transitory. But how transitory is transitory? That depends on what central banks want to count. If they were to consider house prices almost anywhere since the turn of the millennium, they would know that inflation is well above what they define as their tolerance threshold. And that's true for a number of other assets that have simply risen and disappeared beyond the reach of most. Peter Schiff thinks the Fed is destroying the foundation of the economy. Peter said the Fed's asset purchases are propping up the entire economic bubble. In quotes, if the Fed were to actually do what they are saying, they run the risk of toppling the economy because they are going to pull the foundation out from under it, which is why they are just talking. They don't actually act. Peter believes that the Fed is the biggest obstacle keeping us from true economic prosperity. Savings are being destroyed, but if the Fed is punishing savers to the point that no one wants to save, then it would have destroyed the very foundation of the economy. The Fed is trying to replace it with a printing press. Why do globalists hate populism? Because populism cares about people and catering to the common citizens of a nation, regardless of race and ethnicity, giving them a voice in their respective societies. When will the locusts arrive? Governor Bailey's speech argued that so many economic plagues are hitting the economy that he asked when will the locusts arrive. The number of supply bottlenecks seems to be increasing. Energy prices are skyrocketing. The labor market is a puzzle, and while inflation is transitory in quotes, it is still seen at 4% this year, as taxes are also going up. Are we really that rich? Any way to define wealth? What if our commoditized and monetized definition of wealth reflects a staggering poverty of culture, spirit, wisdom, practicality, and common sense? The conventional definition of wealth is solely financial, ownership of money and assets, the assumption that the money can buy anything the owner desires: power, access, land, shelter, energy, transportation, and, if not love, then a facsimile of affection. As we explore what can't actually be bought or commoditized, this question arises. What if our definition of commoditized and monetized wealth reflects a staggering poverty of culture, spirit, wisdom, integrity, warmth, kindness, friendship, practicality, and common sense? The final news. Robert Kiyosaki predicts a big crash in the financial markets in October. Kiyosaki wrote that such a crash would occur because of short-term fixed income securities issued by the Fed and Treasury. The investor predicts that gold, silver, and Bitcoin could also collapse. Given that scenario, The writer argues that cash will be the best option for making any trades following the market crash, but that is a personal opinion. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.